a clockmaker in the end who was able to come up with the concept of longitude and change navigation and everything.
Navigation saved hundreds of thousands of lives.
Absolutely.
Because,
but I think you're right that people were fascinated with measuring time and the technology that goes with it. Yeah. I meant to tell you too that I really do like the production in the book with the clock face at the chapters. I thought that was kind of a little embellishment.
That was my idea. I have to say, yeah, I like to do little graphic things from time to time. In my book, The Empty Chair, which is set in North Carolina, it's the only Lincoln Rhyme book not set in Manhattan. He goes down to a fictional town in North Carolina to potentially, he's debating having an operation for his quadriplegic condition. And I drew a map of the area, and I spent time, it's near the Dismal Swamp. So if you could superimpose this map on the geography, it looks the same. The towns are different. I changed the name to protect my rear end, basically, because I say some rather unkind things about the townspeople and the local government down there. So I figured I'd better just be safe since I'm living in North Carolina now. But I drew the map myself and had great fun doing it. And of course, a professional artist took what I did and made a very nice chart out of it. But I came up with the idea for the clocks, and I think it's kind of fun because, as with all of my books, it takes place over a short time period. The clock is ticking from page one.
Yes, I've described this book as the one with the literal ticking clock on many occasions because oftentimes your plots, the way you set them up, have a finite time, something like the one with whatever was going to happen on New Year's Eve in Washington,
the Devil's
DC.
Teardrop, right.
And I thought that was a wonderful ticking clock because it was so specific.
Barbara, you know what I wanted to do, and I come up with crazy ideas, and thank goodness I have a wonderful publisher, Simon & Schuster, and they don't let me get away with stupid things. I don't know if you've seen these greeting cards, and you open them up, and there's a little chip or something that makes a noise in it. It can play Happy Birthday or something like that. I wanted it. You open the book and it ticks. I thought that would be very fun to do. Of course, I'm sure it would be exorbitantly expensive. Yeah. And then somebody pointed out to me, Jeff, what if somebody's on the airplane and they open up your book and somebody hears a ticking thing? Bad idea. So that's why I have to rein in my imagination from time to time.
I'm sure there'd be some sort of children's liability issue too if they could get the chip out and swallow it.
Oh, well said. Speaking of lawyers,
yes,
Barbara,
well, I did that too. So, and also never really practiced it, but that's a whole different story. When you were doing this early work and writing on the train and all, you wrote, if I remember right, because I opened the Poison Pen in 1989, and you kind of snuck up on me because you were putting out quite a lot of stuff. Most of them, if not all of them then, were paperback originals. Yep. And you had at least one pseudonym.
Yeah, just one. Yeah.
Which were those Location Scout books. There are three.
Right, three in that series. I had energy.
What was the name of the?
William Jeffries.
That's it.
Yep.
Right.
William Jeffries was my pseudonym. I had energy in my youth going back. I did 2 books a year then, and my contract with my original publisher, actually not my first publisher, but I should say my major publisher at that time, as all authors do, had given me a contract that said, as all authors have, a contract that said, thou shalt not publish under your name within a 12-month period with any other company, for obvious reasons. And so I said, well, that's okay. I wrote 2 books in that year. One was a Rune book, and we can talk about her in a second if we like. And then one of the book that turned out to be a William Jeffries book. And I gave that to them 6 months after they'd published one of my books. And they said, well, thank you, but we can't. Is this your book for next year? And I said, no, I want you to publish it now. They said, well, we really can't do 2 books a year by an author. You step on the sales of the prior book. Now, there are, of course, very famous and popular authors now who have proven that wrong because they seem to do a book about every 2 or 3 hours.
Like Robert Barker was doing 3 a year. Right.
And I'm very impressed with that. But my publisher, in effect, said no. So I said, well, the book's done. I'm working on another one now. They said, well, if you want to sell it to somebody else, that's fine. It just can't be under your name. And so I picked William Jeffries. Seemed like a good one. Went to a different company and published those 3. And those were PBOs, paperback originals. 2 of them nominated for Edgars.
Right. Yeah, I remember trying to figure out who the heck William Jeffries was.
Right.
In fact, I felt the whole thing. I mean, I turned around like 3 or 4 years later, you know, and here was this whole body of work by you that is just kind of, as I say, snuck up on me.
You know, oddly, Barbara, we have in the business, as you know, the phrase breakout book.
Right.
And that would be, say, a Da Vinci Code for Dan Brown, who was a successful author up until the Da Vinci Code. But then that's the one that took off. I've never had that, but and my theory has always been I don't want a breakout book, one that transcends everybody's expectations. I want to increase sales every year. There's no question about that. But I want to be more of a meat and potatoes kind of writer and have a steadily growing audience. And that's pretty much what I've done. And the paperback originals, each one sold a little bit better than the next one. And my theory has always been, rather than one huge hit, a book a year, come hell or high water. And I actually have left publishing companies because they have not agreed contractually to publish me once a year.
I didn't know that. But don't you think that The Bone Collectors was kind of, maybe it was the movie?
Never a bestseller.
I didn't realize that. I thought it was.
Never been on a single bestseller list. No.
How interesting. Because I sort of thought that's the one where, you know, all of a sudden...
It certainly got my name around. Now, the
right.
books following that, The Coffin Dancer, for instance, which I think was a bit smaller of a book in the Lincoln Rhyme series, a bit smaller book. The crime was more circumscribed, I'd say. The villains it was a smaller cast of characters. It was my first New York Times bestseller, and they've all gone on the list after that, and each one has sold, you know, progressively more, but nothing, no huge breakout hit.
Well, yeah, I guess we were defining breakout in sort of a different way. I define it as when people are paying attention. I don't know that I necessarily define it in terms of sales. And the other way that I would define it, that the ordinary reader or something would not define it, is when publishers go back and republish those books they didn't think were valuable enough to keep in print.
Absolutely
and that happened with quite a few of your early paperback originals, you know, had wandered off, and then suddenly came a big, and I think it's Bantam, isn't it, did a big republication program and brought a lot of those books back. Now that's when I realized, as a bookseller, that publishers are paying attention when books that an author wrote that I couldn't get to sell have suddenly become available again, and that means they're taking you seriously.
Including your laundry list and anything else you wrote.
That's right.
Your essays from high school.
And The Bone Collector was kind of that particular book.
That was that moment, right, that epiphanal moment, in effect.
When at least we know that New York took you really seriously as an author. So Rune came from where, and also where'd she go?
Well, very good question. Rune, just to synopsize, if that's a verb, it probably shouldn't be, but we'll use it. Fair enough. Rune was a 20-something, late teens, 20-something waif, Holly Golightly, living in Manhattan in the 1980s. She was working at a video store, an aspiring filmmaker maybe, but she wasn't quite sure what she wanted to do, as most people of that age living in Manhattan in the 1980s, and possibly at any age, at any era, felt. And she's an amateur PI. Now, they aren't quite, well, unintentionally. She didn't intend to be a customer. She worked in a video store, and a customer of hers was killed. This is in the first book, Manhattan is My Beat. A customer of hers was murdered, an elderly gentleman, a retiree. The police, one of 2,000 deaths in Manhattan. They didn't have any time for it. So she said, well, this is just unacceptable. So she investigates the crime and gets involved in all kinds of shenanigans. Not really cozies, not really hard-boiled. Definitely had an edge to it. There's some sex and definitely some violence in it. Lots of twists, though, twists and turns, mistaken identities, fake identities, laying the groundwork for my future trademark in writing, of course. And she was a very popular character. She was in 3 books, Manhattan is My Beat, Death of a Blue Movie Star, and Hard News. But what I found was how do I put it? The canvas was rather small with Rune. The palette of paint, to carry the analogy just about as far as I want to, was fairly limited. It wasn't monotone, but it was a bit limited. and people loved her and found her endearing, but I didn't want an endearing character. I wanted a compelling character.